Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our part 3 session of our underwriting webinar series. Glad for all of you to be here today. My name is Roy Goodart. I'm the Vice President of Product Management here at iPipeline, and I'll be serving as your webinar host today. At iPipeline, we're focused on helping you secure more financial futures through our innovative and comprehensive suite of end-to-end digital solutions. I want to take the time to thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us and come together to discuss underwriting's most pressing challenges and its opportunities. In an effort to minimize some of the distractions and background noises, we muted all of the participants and disabled your camera functions. Also, too, the webinar series will be recorded, and each of you will receive an email with some instructions on how to view and access the recording. We'll also post this out on our iPipeline.com for you. Should you have questions during the session, please use the chat feature and send the question, and I'll take a look at it at the end, and we'll get those answers for you at the end of the session. We'll have time to do that right at the end of there. At our webinar series has been built to develop a partnership with several key industry experts. Together, we'll uncover what regulatory changes may impact the future of underwriting, how AI and underwriters are rewriting the rules of life insurance, and how the pandemic had helped advance underwriting processes, trends, and consumer expectations, and a whole lot more. So just so you know, again, most of the folks on the session today, you may have signed up for all 3 of the webinar series. Some of you may have not, but if you did miss one of the first 2 sessions earlier this month and you'd like to rewatch them, there's a little QR code down here at the bottom on the right-hand side that you can click on or take a picture of with your camera, and it'll redirect you to the recording. I'm also going to have this at the end when we do the questions on that last slide that we go through. You'll see it there as well. So let's take a minute here and let's introduce our speakers for today. So first up, we have Robin Holicky. So Robin brings a 10-year career in life operations and underwriting with her current role of AVP Chief Underwriter at F&G Life. With 30 years of insurance experience, she's focused on how to continue to innovate the life application process, or the life process, to support the industry where there's still so many clients out there to insure to meet their financial needs and dreams and to plan for the unexpected. As an active member of AHU, she displays a passion for participating in the organization from both a member and past industry opportunities, fulfilling speaker roles and helping lay the foundation for robust annual meetings. She recently completed a 3-year commitment on AHU on the program committee and previously supported the Twin Cities Loma Board as the co-president and is currently incoming AHU VP of Conference. We also have Antoinette Blair. Antoinette is the head of HR and compliance at GBU Life and is responsible for developing, implementing, and monitoring GBU Life's compliance framework. She is called to the bar in the UK and in the Bahamas and brings 20 years of legal and compliance experience both locally and internationally. Antoinette holds an LLB degree, so a Bachelor of Law, from Kingston University, and from England, and an LMM, so a Master of Law in Insurance from Western Michigan University. She holds an international compliance certification in anti-money laundering and compliance. She is also certified risk and compliance management professional and certified legal professional in ethics and compliance. She's a mother of 3, Julian, Jonathan, and James. Antoinette enjoys meeting new people and spending time with her family and friends. And then we have Kris Chaney. Kris is the AVP Director for Underwriting for National Life Group. She has 32 years of experience. She currently is an AHU Educational Committee member, has a passion for learning and continuing education. Kris graduated with her Master's in Business Administration with a specialization in business organization in 2015 with honors. She is very proud very proud mother of 2 daughters, Reagan and Kate. Kris resides in Newark, Ohio, and enjoys attending concerts, cheering for the Cleveland Browns, and spending time with her family and friends. And she has 2 lovely border collie mixed rescue dogs. So we're excited. We're excited to have Robin, Antoinette, and Kris join us today, and all of you as well. So let's jump right into the questions for the group here. So we'll start off with the first question, and that is really, what is the #1 regulatory topic that you're paying most attention to that specifically impacts underwriting and business operations? And what has your organization done to stay on top of these? So let's start with you, Robin. You want to take this one first?
Sure. Thanks, Roy. So the one I think that probably comes to mind for many of us is those regulations like in Colorado, Connecticut, the NAIC regulation on the use of data and how we can and or cannot use that if there is a unfair discrimination risk with the use of that data. And just to dive a little deeper into that, this holds us accountable for really testing the data that we utilize in the services that we utilize, whether they're items that we have built ourselves as a carrier or whether we're using a service from a vendor. And not just saying we're using a service, but we are understanding the attributes behind that service. So this one comes first to mind for me, and from how we have responded to it or how you stay connected to it, it really is staying engaged within the space of regulation. And we do as participants, many of us as carriers have this access to the ACLI regular meetings where many of us as carriers have employees that are part of some of those committees as well. So that's one big way to do that, right? Then you can have access to the ACLI in an effort to understand where they are influencing and monitoring different regulations that are in the works in all of the states. But then internally looking at how you develop task force from a standpoint of being ready for a regulation or responsiveness to a regulation like this. So thinking about pulling in key members from your life and new business operations, but then across your support areas like legal, compliance, and risk to really partner and build that understanding. Because sometimes I can be a very detailed individual from a life standpoint, but maybe we need to also be focused on the other products that we may be using or ways we are securing leads to selling business where that data can also be used in that way.
Great. Thank you. Antoinette or Kris,
Yes.
do you have anything you'd like to follow up with that? How are you guys doing at yours?
Yeah, sure, Roy, thanks. So the #1 area that we're focused on is the AI regulations. And while we're not currently using AI in our underwriting process, we are looking to move in that direction. So it's important for us to really keep a pulse on the regulations that are in that space and that are coming out of the states. For example, Colorado, New York, and California that we're aware of. When we talk about the NAIC, and Robin mentioned this earlier, the NAIC issued a draft proposal in July of this year, which outlines guidelines for companies using the AI systems. And essentially what they're saying in those guidelines is that they're encouraging insurers to really develop, implement, and maintain a written program for use of AI systems, which is designed to ensure that the systems insurers are using do not violate any unfair trade practices laws. They also note in their paper that the AI systems will be subject to review by the commissioner, and it's helpful to have this written program in place to assist with any review that's being undertaken by the states. What is our organization doing to stay up to date on these issues? Similar to what Robin mentioned, attending industry meetings such as, ACLI, following up on updates that are coming from the ACLI and the NAIC. Internally, also, from a compliance perspective, we partner with our business partners to ensure that they have an understanding of the regulations that are coming out in these areas, ensuring that we have the proper protocols and processes in place to make sure that we're in a position to really comply with these regulations.
Great, thank you.
And I would agree with what you both have have mentioned. And I'll also say that just from the reading that I've done, and what I have been a part of, just seeing how specific and cumbersome the requirements actually can be, to make sure that we're adhering to the guidelines that are being set. You know, the few states, you know, that were mentioned, we're looking, it's always one of those things where, you know, other states will follow. So I think that's one big thing that we do, is just to, you know, make sure we're ahead of it, thinking, you know, what's next, and be proactive. I wouldn't be surprised, and I think it already is going into other types of insurance besides life. And, you know, look at our auto and property, it's also being used in that regard. So Robin, I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are, if insurers will just perhaps not to use this at all due to all that's involved in maintaining and upholding the guidelines.
Yeah, I think that's falling back to that, right? What tools are you using? You're really going to have to question that to say, are there some that put you at a higher risk of not being able to answer the detailed questions, right? And I think that we will have to put a lot of thought into when we're looking at different markets where we're selling, where the tools make the most sense. So if there is a demographic where you have more exposure in one of these potential special classes, if you want to refer to some of the basis of race, color, national, ethnic origin, if there is a higher risk there, do you as a carrier, as a leader, need to help make a decision that you need to shift and pivot to different tools? And thinking along the lines of, if you're using health-related information and data, is that less of a risk than some of the other tools that are available? So there will be some additive decision making to dive deeper into that angle of it. It's an excellent follow back.
Awesome. Thank you. Great answers to those. Let's dive into question number 2. And this really is what other regulation changes have you seen recently and implemented or currently being discussed, and how you feel those will have an impact on the underwriting business operations today? What actions has your organization taken to be proactive in those changes? And what advice could you give those attending the session today? So let's start with Antoinette here.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Roy. The other regulations that we're really focused on outside of the AI regulations is looking at the annuity suitability regulations and data protection laws. From an annuity suitability perspective, looking at the states that have adopted the NAIC best interest standards or model. And what that really is, what that model really is about is it requires insurers to implement a system of supervision, essentially ensuring that products that are being recommended to our consumers are in their best interest. There's also requirements for agents to provide certain disclosures. And there's about a little over 40 states that have adopted this model. I would say about 45 states that have adopted this model already. So really keeping an eye out on which states have adopted that model, ensuring that especially our sales team and to some extent our new business and underwriting teams know what forms need to be in place from a suitability perspective, make sure that our agents are aware as to what disclosures they need to provide consumers. When we shift and we look at the data protection laws that we're focused on, as you know, there's several states that have enacted consumer data privacy bills. And a number of those states have several provisions in common, such as the right to access and delete personal information and to opt out of the sale of personal information. So here again, we're working with the IT teams to make sure that they understand the data protection laws and which states have adopted these data protection laws, and to make sure that our policies and procedures are being updated and we have the proper controls in place. The advice that I would give, and Robin touched on this earlier, is really to actively keep engaged with what is happening in the industry by attending sessions such as these, designating an individual or individuals where appropriate to attend industry meetings that can be facilitated through various channels. And we touched on this earlier, like the ACLI or NAIC meetings.
Great. Kris, do you have any follow-up to that one?
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of others that come to my mind. And, you know, I think most everyone it's been around a while, you know, the regulations involving replacements. And that's, of course, just activities, regulating those activities for insurers and producers with respect to replacement of existing life insurance, and basically to protect the interests of the purchasers, and making sure that there's some type of minimal standards of conduct that must be adhered to. So that's one. It's been around forever, but it's still here. And then also what comes to mind is AG 49, the hot topic, and just making, you know, it's actuarial in nature, but just making sure that the illustration guidelines are followed, just promoting that fair consumer practices and equality. And the last one that comes to mind is just continued awareness around genetic testing, and knowing, you know, what we're able to use with our decisioning as we make risk assessment decisions, which is continuing to monitor that. I totally agree with it comes to industry meetings, making sure that you're tapped out externally, making sure you have representation, but internally, I think it's important, as Antoinette would know, you know, being in compliance, just making sure that from an underwriting perspective, we are having, you know, a basic conversation, communication with our compliance as well as our legal department on a regular basis.
Great. Robin, anything to share there?
Yeah, the one that I'll call out is one that it's passed in some level in, I think, about 11 states. Think of the Death with Dignity regulations, where a patient can choose suicide as an option, elective suicide, to end life, right? And then compare that and think about that along the lines of our 2-year contestability guidelines generally in use across the life insurance space, right? And how that can change the dynamic of processing a claim on the back end, where there's more and more awareness as these regulations pass, more and more documentation out in the space of end-of-life treatment that helps build awareness for the consumer. And then think about how that potentially can impact us from a fraudulent claim perspective. Now, claims, you're dealing with death, right? Can be a very sensitive situation across any life, right? But think along the lines of where we have seen potentially increased misrep in certain ways on the front end of our process, right, with accelerated or exam-free processes. But then on the back end, what risk is there to a fraudulent cause of death during those first 2 years on the death certificate that we need to be more aware of? And how do you sniff that out as you're the claims examiner processing a claim to evaluate that, right? So that's one that I think is going to evolve, and maybe even on the side of protecting the consumer, if that is the choice. Will some states pass different regulation that will influence or impact our 2-year contestability guidelines? So that's one that comes to mind for me. And just that fraud overall, thinking of, go back to our first question and talking about data, where we'd like to be creative to use different sources, and how we always think back to what will the regulator say if you choose this type of tool, right? So facial recognition, AI, right? All those pieces, how that will change on, will we always pause and think of that in our process of evaluating services downstream, because maybe there isn't a regulation yet that hits that, but what will the regulators say if we utilize something that protects us from fraud, but could hurt the consumer in some way? So just a glimpse into, it maybe doesn't exist yet, maybe does in some ways and capacities, but I think this whole behaving around and being aware of the regulatory space and what the regulatory impacts will be is something as leaders across the industry that we have to continue to think about anything we implement.
That's awesome. You all gave some great things for people to think about. We covered things: suitability, data protection, replacement laws, genetic testing, death with dignity, fraud overall. There's a lot of stuff there for people to think about. So those are great comments and great feed in for it. All right, well, let's move to the next one here. So with the recent regulations and changes regarding HIV that's coming down through California, what's your organization done to stay ahead of this? And do you see other states following suit anytime soon? And maybe what's going to be the impact that does it have on your overall business operations? So let's start with Kris on this one.
Sure. Thanks, Roy. Yeah, so as you mentioned, the California legislation regarding HIV, and that involves that an insurer is unable to decline coverage based solely on HIV. So it's very important to get ahead of the anticipation that other states would be following in true regulatory fashion. So I believe that the preferred approach is just to get ahead of it, which is what we're doing. Consider internally just going ahead and treating all states the same versus California differently. And being in the industry for many years, legislation aside, I think it's very exciting to see us at a place where favorable HIV applicants can be insurable. And it really is a true testament to using our risk learnings when evaluating and making our risk assessment decisions. I think it's very important to make sure we have proper training, we involve our medical department, and we use our resources, such as our reinsurers, as we continue down this path of looking at these applicants on a more regular basis.
Great. Robin, anything that you'd like to follow up on that one? How's your organization?
Yeah, I think piggybacking off of all the things that Kris included too, really, when you have a medical impairment that for the extent of my career, majority of the time, we have not been able to offer, one of the biggest things is how do you help staff understand all the different details to an impairment like this and what the best ones are. And this is underwriting training, right? What are the best scenarios that qualify? Because you're still considering probably a pretty high substandard offer if you can offer on the best case scenario, right? Again, this is a really sensitive history, right? Any unadmitted history would be admitted history to this nature, very sensitive and still has to be handled with the most awareness of confidentiality, because we still don't always know if the producer agent behind that financial planner necessarily is aware of the history. So how do we continue to handle that side of this type of history with as much sensitivity and awareness, and then have the hope, I think Kris kind of alluded to this, that there will be more and more opportunity to offer coverage to lives that have this diagnosis, but do have now what is a medical advancement over the last 20 to 30 years that has helped us be able to extend life with living with HIV. So it's still staying very close and aware to that. I think depending upon the size carrier that we are, it really depends on if that's going to be internal with our medical department, doing that type of training, sharing what we're seeing and the lives we've been able to insure, but then going that step further to on the side of, if you don't have that, where do you go for that expertise to help build out that expertise within your underwriting staff? So again, really great opportunity. I do like the countrywide approach, just from a personal processing perspective, if it's all handled the same way, I think you build more readiness. So when other states follow, you maybe are ahead in one reaction to one regulation that's out there already.
Great. Antoinette, any follow-ups there?
Yeah, sure. And Kris and Robin, they really touched on a number of areas that cover how we as an organization address the changes coming out of California, talking about, it's important to train the teams, make sure they understand the impact and make sure that our policies, ensure that our policies and our procedures are updated. There are a number of areas that comes out of that regulation, and Kris and Robin touched on it, right? That you cannot decline a case based solely on a person's HIV status, but there's also other areas. For example, a life insurer that asks an applicant to undergo an HIV test, they're required to obtain the applicant's written informed consent for that test, and the law outlines what should be included in that written form consent, such as, the description of the test to be performed, the purpose and the potential uses, etc. The regulations also look at determination as to whether to require a test, and there's some prohibited considerations that California outlines with respect to gender, sexual orientation, and race, and there are also some others. So it's really important to get an understanding and an appreciation of these regulations to ensure that the impacted areas have that training to ensure that your policies and procedures are being updated. And like Kris mentioned, like internally, we're treating all the states the same, and I do feel that other states will likely to follow suit.
Great, thank you. It sounds like a lot of stuff going on there, and it sounds like a lot of the other states are starting to look at that as well. So good feedback. Thanks for addressing that question there. Let's look at the next one here. So data, right? Data is big for everybody, so we're excited for this particular question. So let's talk about it. From an underwriting standpoint, how do you navigate all of that data that's available today? And what's the best practices that you can share with us? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly of this from the side of the third-party data? And from your perspective, how are you all working through that? So let's run this one back through. And Robin, why don't you take this one first?
Sure. I think there's still a lot of excitement over all the items that we have in this space of being choosy, what services you use, what scores, what data do you decide to go down the path of using. And you really can use it at the very front end, like I mentioned earlier, as far as your lead consideration to all the way through the decision in just minutes, right? So there's always has to be a focus on how much, right? And how efficient and how scalable can all of that data be in your space of evaluating your unit costs? And you do have to be choosy, but isn't it amazing that it used to take, weeks to get a decision out the door, where now sometimes we can do it in seconds, right? So that customer experience and how it really is helping build out the coverage of financial promises and dreams for people from the use of a life insurance product. So there's a constant change and evolution in the services. I think some of them we'd love to have faster. If you think about electronic health records, and that space has grown tremendously, but does it still have opportunity? Sure. But I think it's really two-pronged. We've got to look at how we incorporate it into our process to keep it efficient without losing that scale, but then staying sharp on what data we receive, what demographic we're running it on. If you do see anomalies in some of the behaviors of the data you see, how do you react to it? Can you react to it quickly enough when it's coming through in an instant decision? So what kind of controls do you have in your process to have that come through? So that I shifted a little bit there to the uglier side of it. It's not that I think in the day we thought data would replace some of us as experienced underwriters, but we need those experienced underwriters to be helping us with those controls that become part of this process on the back end. So a lot of opportunity, probably more good than more bad and ugly.
Great. Kris, you want to follow up with that one?
I agree, Robin. And I just want to add to that and just say it's important to differentiate between the medical data versus a mortality score. Using the medical data is very explainable to agents and consumers where, we've struggled for the last several years explaining the mortality score, the lifestyle factors that go into it, and how that, translates into a risk class. So when it comes to the medical data, I think it's great information. It's again explainable. We view it as our first APS, really. So it has definitely been a game changer to have some of that data available. I think with anything when it comes to using anything alternative to traditional underwriting, I think it's even more so of importance to make sure that you have a crucial robust audit process, because again, we want to keep a pulse on what's happening. You want ahead of it, like you said, Robin. We want to make sure that we're watching for anything that, of course, puts us in jeopardy from the bottom line standpoint.
Great. Antoinette, do you have anything to round out there, or how you
Yeah, sure.
might be doing stuff?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Roy. And I mean, Robin and Kris talked on a lot of things, really analyzing the data that's collected, risk assessment, modeling, looking at historical data and patterns. Really, I think third-party data use can be great because it creates efficiencies. Some of the challenges from using third-party data that you can see is it sometimes can create inaccuracies. And when you look from a cybersecurity perspective, there could be potential breaches by vendors that can put your organization's information at risk. And then also, too, when you look at the size and complexity of the data provider market, this can make it difficult to sometimes identify the right data sources and patterns. So those are the things that I would add to that that conversation.
Great. Yeah, this one I think is going to be one that we're going to start to see, more and more things come through. It kind of ties back to question number one with all the regulations and the things that are there too, as we start to look at third-party data and how AI attaches that third-party data, and what y'all are doing there is going to be things to watch for sure. It seems like we hear a lot about this from most folks like yourself and other parts of the insurance companies and that we work with out there as well. So thanks for all the great comments that are there. So we've run through the four primary questions for the group here today. Before we get into the questions and the things that you all have kind of given us and some of the things in the feedback through the session today, I just want to thank Robin, Antoinette, and Kris for their time. It took a lot to get these put together. It took a lot of time for them to spend with us and make sure that we give you all some great information there and hopefully answer the questions that you have. Do want to thank all of you too for showing up today, having the opportunity to listen to the group. Hopefully we gave you some great things to think about, some things that maybe you were thinking about as well, maybe some of the things that you weren't, that will open your eyes in some areas for it too. So again, thank you all for participating, and thank you all for joining today too. Let's flip over. We had a few questions that came through, but again, really quickly, I flashed this QR code up earlier on the first screen that we had, but I just want to make sure that you understand that it's there for you. You can grab that. That'll bring you to a website that'll have all the recordings on it for a later point in time too. So here's a question that came in, and it is, what exposure, if any, do we have related to third-party risk for underwriting data? So I know y'all kind of covered that in the last question a little bit, but maybe one of you can take that and expand it out a little bit. One of you want to field that one?
Yeah, I think I think it can roll right back to our first question to some level with that question, right? So the exposure in different demographics is a little different, right? If you think about here, I'll just call out a scenario. So say you have someone who has come to the States, doesn't have as much of a footprint, whether it's in a credit space for some of the mortality scoring, or it's the medical space because they haven't had a lot of medical care here yet, right? So our exposure there is we, as the pricing side of things, may not get enough information in that exam-free accelerated process to price that life really appropriately to our expectations. We may price it very favorably in favor of the client, depending upon how we set our thresholds for that data scoring. Or if we are rather conservative and say, hey, we don't have really a footprint on this risk, we are going to push this down a fully underwritten space, that may be a risk where we would potentially lose the risk to another competitor, or just lose the risk altogether and leave a bad taste from a standpoint of a sale of life insurance for that particular client, right? So there's a little exposure in that way. Keystroke errors and securing the wrong information for the wrong client. Antoinette touched on this a little bit from a standpoint of cybersecurity and did we get the information on the right client? That is a risk, that exposure there. If for some reason our expectations on the pricing, right? Because a lot of our pricing will look at how far off will our pricing be for said product, say, that's marketed, marketed out in the space. How far off will that be from what our expected mortality is, and what kind of financial impact will that be to the industry, right? I think a lot of carriers have gone down the path of saying, okay, we expect some slippage here, and have calculated that into our pricing, because the benefit of getting this business on the books outweighs not getting it on the books and having a little bit of slippage in our mortality. So I think we don't know a lot yet on if the way the industry has priced some of these opportunities is appropriate to what we will see. And then we have things like a pandemic that pop up, and maybe that throws off our pricing even outside of the slippage in this way. So that was 3 different facets of exposure, Roy. I hope I got to some of the things that our questioner was asking, but there definitely is exposure that we have to be cautious to.
I think that's great. And the pandemic one, right? We all threw a wrench in a lot of areas there. Have another one of those for sure. We got one that's actually a comment versus a question that I just wanted to bring up, just so the rest of the group would hear it. And I don't know if the 3 of you actually do much in Canada, or it's just the US. So I'm not sure if you have an opportunity to weigh in on this one or not, but it says, in Canada, they look at the viral load and the CD4 cell counts for the last 2 years, and must be taking ART. These are the minimum requirements, but overall, from a big picture, the key is to offer outside of the HIV. So I don't know if y'all have anything else to add to that or not, but I thought it was a great comment. It's just something that we'd bring up for maybe some of the other Canadian folks that are on the call today.
Yeah, very helpful.
All right.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of other great questions that came in. Let me jump to those really quickly. So one is, what's the biggest piece of advice that you all on the panel today have for folks on the call who may not have a direct line of sight into upcoming regulatory changes impacting the industry? Where do you folks go to learn more?
Yes. So, sorry, I'll take it, Robin and Kris, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
sure.
go ahead.
So advice that I would give is really to, network with individuals who are in the industry. I think that's valuable. Individuals who may have direct responsibility for monitoring or tracking regulatory changes, like your compliance professionals. Where we go to learn more in our organizations through, and I mentioned some of these before, like attending workshops, ACLI meetings, signing up signing up to state websites to receive updates. There's also First Consulting, if anyone's familiar with that vendor, who has great industry newsletters that are very helpful from keeping you up to date as to what's happening in the regulatory space.
Great. All right. Looks like
And
we have
maybe an
yes.
additional
Yeah,
thought,
go ahead.
Roy.
Yeah, Kris.
I think, those of us who maybe don't have that direct line of sight to a committee on the ACLI, or are not involved in our company's regular updates from a regulatory standpoint. If you have interest there, I would look for a mentoring opportunity with someone in one of those support areas I mentioned earlier, like legal, compliance, risk, to see if they'll even mentor with you, if that's an area of interest you have, or it will impact you in your work in the future, and you'd like to be more prepared or be supportive in that way of your assigned department. Those mentoring opportunities really a lot of times help you talk about it at a layman's level versus the real heavy legal side of the writing of a bill, right, and understanding it. So opportunity, I think, there if you find the right mentor too.
I love that mentor
Yeah.
comment. That's a great one.
Yeah, along with that, I agree. Whether it's a formal type of mentorship opportunity, relationship, or is it just leaning on your peers? I mean, obviously, we're a very close-knit industry, and we're always there to support one another. So if it's something that you're needing additional support, I can't imagine anyone would turn you away from helping you gain the information and knowledge that you're looking for. Even attending or watching this webinar, of course, is a step in the right direction of helping you achieve awareness and being clued into what's happening in the industry.
That's great. Those are great. All great ideas. Thank you. It looks like the next one, this individual has some having a little bit of challenges with ensuring that their staff and organizations trained up with the new regulations that come in. So the question really is do you all have any good processes or best ways for you and that work for you and your team to get them educated and inform folks around the organization of the changes?
We take opportunities during department meetings, and then follow it up with written correspondence if that makes sense. Sometimes, different folks are different type of learners, whether it be visual or, retaining it from hearing the messaging. So I think just making sure you're communicating it, and when in doubt, ask for feedback. Ask your folks, like, what is it that you need in order for you to be successful in understanding where we are and where we're headed.
Yeah, and just to follow up to that, Kris, in compliance, my team and I, when legislation becomes enacted, what we really do is really look at that legislation and look at the requirements and determine what the impact is to our potential impact to our business partners. And once we highlight or outline that high level summary, we really meet with our business partners to share those points, to look at those requirements and work with our business partners to ensure that they understand what the requirements are, they understand what the potential impacts are, and what can we do to come into compliance, what processes we may have to change, what policies and procedures we may need to update to really address those requirements in the legislation.
All right. We have one last one we'll take here. There's still a couple of others. We'll take those and make sure that they get filtered through to folks. But this one here is, I think, a great one, and probably one that all three of you can certainly weigh in on. It's from your perspective, where do you see the evolution of underwriting being in 3 to 5 years from now? So
yeah, I think I'll go first on that one, if okay. I think we'll see more data services in different ways. With more, I mentioned electronic health records earlier. I think that space has evolved. I think it will evolve even further. Think up to the level, and we see some of this from some of the service offerings where there's OCR opportunities that can be converted into summaries. It can even, look for wording that is mortality specific versus morbidity specific. So it's helping the underwriter underwrite, or the engine underwrite to that particular type of risk. I think we'll see more automation and straight through processing across the industry, even to the different levels or sizes of companies. And that we'll just see, hopefully, more consumers being interested in how to get that coverage quickly, an effort to be covered for what is the unfortunate or unplanned, or what is the planning for the future of a legacy.
Great. Kris, Antoinette, do you want to follow up with that? I'd love to hear your feedback too there.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Robin. I really think what we will see is that new data and technology will likely drive underwriting in the future. I can see greater use of automation and alternative data and artificial intelligence moving forward.
I would agree with that. And I think, just when we think we know about the newest and latest, a vendor surprises us with something new, bright and shiny, to help us assess our risk. So I look for, even more innovation in that space. I think that's when kind of we go back to the exposure. I think that's what is going to be important for us to, as carriers, to vet out which particular vendors are the kind we want to partner with. So I think that definitely will continue to be something to keep in mind, forefront in that respect.
Awesome. Well, those are great. Well, again, everyone, thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining the webinar series. This is certainly something that we want to continue with iPipeline. We want to try to continue to bring the innovation and the insights and the thought leadership across not only what we're doing here, but with all of our partners like yourself. So again, thank you for attending. Thank all of you from a panelist perspective for joining us and all of the hard work that you've done. Hopefully everybody will have a great holiday weekend, and we'll have more conversations in the future. Have a great day. Thanks.